Good morning, everybody. Jimmy22 here to ruin plot points and chew bubblegum. And I never even actually got around to buying bubblegum because when I was young, we used to get those Bazooka Joes for Halloween, and I hated those, and I've never forgiven the bubblegum industry since. But that's neither here or now. Today, I'm here to talk to you about The Color of Magic, the first novel in Terry Pratchett's Discworld series. Which, if you haven't read yet, it's kind of a mistake because everybody should read Terry Pratchett's Discworld series. And being the first one, I'll admit this isn't quite as good as the others because he's still figuring out the rules and everything, but it's quite a lot of fun. And the main characters to this is there's two, Rincewind and Two Flower. And I like to point out right away, there is no romance. Well, at least between these two main characters, and that's a good thing, just because romance in books always feels forced to me. A lot of the times, most of the times, the only time I can think of where I actually read a book with romance and I'm like, you know what, this doesn't feel forced, is The End of an Affair by Graham Greene. But we'll get to that later. So, the main characters are Rincewind, a wizard, and Two Flower, the very first in this world tourist. So let's start off with Rincewind. Rincewind is a wizard, or at least he's somebody who wanted to be a wizard. He's known as a failed wizard, and the reason being isn't so much because he's dumb, because he's not stupid. I'm not gonna say he's stupid. He's very perceptive. Like he'll realize something bad's gonna happen, or he'll understand. He has an innate understanding of when things are gonna go wrong, and he's usually right. So you got to be smart enough to be able to pick out dangers. But the reason why he failed at being a wizard is because on a dare, he went into a library with books that were magical, and these books had spells, and the biggest one was chained in, not so people could steal it, but because the book will take off and spells will get out. And when he opened it, one of the spells jumped into his head. It was one of the 8 great spells. And you're going to hear 8. When you read this book, there's a lot of 8 in this book. And it's not so much in other books, which is weird. But, so one of the books jumped into his head, and he has no more room for any other spells. According to the rules, it takes a lot of knowledge to learn a single spell, and sometimes it pushes out other spells. But most wizards seem to be able to get multiple spells. But Rincewind figures that the reason why he can't learn other spells is because every other spell that he tries to get into his brain is scared off by this big spell. It's one of the 8 fundamental spells, and they don't know which one it is. And so that's why he's a failed wizard. But his other strong point, and again, this is only really, I think, noticed in this story. I'm going to reread the Discworld novels. But is he's really good with language. In fact, that's what helps him meet Two Flower. Because when he meets Two Flower needs an interpreter because, again, he's the first tourist on the Discworld. Nobody else has ever toured anything. He grew up with stories of Ankh-Morpork, which is the main city in Discworld. And most of the stories revolve in some form or fashion around Ankh-Morpork. And Two Flower is a tourist who grew up on these stories. And he's always wanted to see adventurers, heroes, bar fights, brothels, dragons, just everything the world has to offer. He grew tired of where he lives because he was from it was called the Counterweight Continent, but its name escapes me. But he was an accountant, and he just got tired of everything. He got tired of just the day-to-day mundane. He was basically he took it was insurance. They created insurance, and he managed risk. So he's always, which is ironic because he's very upbeat. He's always like, okay, it's a misunderstanding, or something will come along, or what's the point in panicking? That's his character. And also very struck because he wants to see the world and meet heroes and stuff like that. So those are the Those are the two main characters. There's some other. There's two or three other fairly important characters, but those are the two that the story revolves around. The next character I want to talk to you guys about is Death, the literal embodiment of death, the Grim Reaper, the Taker of Souls, the skeleton in the black cloak, and he appears, throughout the story too. And it's the reason why he appears is because wizards are granted certain rights, and this is why ultimately Rincewind is a wizard, because when he's gonna die, Death must come and collect him personally. He can't send, one of his familiars or a lesser entity or demons or whatever. No, when Rincewind dies, he gets to be taken by the Reaper. And I mean, the Reaper does other, it's not to say that the Reaper won't do other, creatures or other living things. No, he does do, like, there's several points where he takes out, gnats or flies or some other people. But if you're a wizard, you get to meet Death. And Death in this story, and in the rest of the Discworld series, is not like other Deaths. He's curious about he's curious about human beings. He's curious about the world. He tries to create, but he can only mimic. You see that a lot later on. In this one, you mostly see that he's kind of like after Rincewind, and it's because Rincewind can't die. Like, he comes close a lot of times to dying, but he just doesn't die. Something always saves him, or he has a turn of luck, or different things happen. And so the Reaper starts to see him as sort of a passion project. Like, he's not, I have to get him, but he sort of just watches him. He's like, I wonder when he's, okay, you're gonna die now. Okay, now you're gonna die. Okay, now you're gonna die. Okay, you can die now. But he never happens. And towards the end, one of the other two characters, Fate, comes in and says, I want him. You're going to get him today. And he's like, what, don't you want him? And then the Grim Reaper's like, well, I'm going to get him eventually. I look forward to it, but there's no point in me panicking. And so the last two characters, and this is where you can kind of say that there is, because when you read it through, it kind of seems unrelated. It just seems like a series of events instead of like a whole overarching plot. But it still seems... A lot of people argue that it doesn't actually have a story, but what it is the gods of Discworld are playing games. And it's kind of like, the Clash of the Titans, how it shows them moving the pieces and, summoning different creatures. It's like that. So, and the two main ones that are always going up against each other, because the other gods always end up, getting defeated, is the Lady and Fate. And Fate is he's more darker. He's more people, Fate in a negative connotation. People meet their end, people have ghastly endings, people become downtrodden, the worst happens. That's Fate. The Lady is more interesting because she's the one god in the Discworld that you cannot call. They will not go to you. Like, I guess it's supposed to be how luck, you can summon luck. You can have maybe some good luck charms, but you can't really summon it. Like, it even says at one point some gamblers decided they were going to have this real great ritual for her. And they all died. Terrible, terrible deaths. It didn't go into detail, because I think that would have ruined the humor a little, but they died. And so, yeah, she's on there too. And those are the you could argue those are the five main characters. But again, Lady and Fate, and you can't call her Lady Luck, because if you call her Lady Luck, she'll disappear. The only way, if you meet her or she comes out, you just say Lady. That's it. If you ever mention her by name, she'll just vanish. And I'm so dumb. There's a sixth character, and he should have gone in front of after Two Flower, but in front of Death, and that is a luggage. Well, kind of like a treasure chest, really, but it's called the luggage. And what it is it's made out of sentient pearl wood, which is living magical wood that's can't be damaged by magic, which they put it to the test towards the end. Like, they really, really try to damage it, and it does not go well. And it's got personality because it follows Two Flower. It's it's his luggage. It stays with him. If something happens, it'll try to rescue him, and it'll just go through anything to save him. And it comes out. It shows up more in the series than Two Flower. In fact, it shows up almost as much as Rincewind because the two end up connected. And it has teeth, and it does eat people, and it tricks people, and it's smart. So yeah, those are the main characters. And as for the plot is, as I've said, doesn't sometimes when you first look at it seem like a full-on plot because it's separated into different pieces. The first part begins with two characters. Named Weasel and Bravd, Bravd. I don't have any idea how you would pronounce that. And they're watching basically chaos. Like the whole city is exploding, smoke and fire just everywhere. And they're watching and they're making a bet. This explosion came from this thing. No, this explosion came from this thing. And as they're talking, this is when you first meet Rincewind. Because he's riding and he's in a panic. And this is also when you meet Two Flower, I think he's clinging on, or I don't want to know if he's full on out of the saddle being dragged by the horse, or if he's just about there without actually getting dirty. But yeah, so they meet him, and Rincewind explains what happens and how he met Two Flower to, translate for him, and how he realized, okay, this guy's carrying around so much money because where Two Flower's from, the Egerian Empire, big pieces of gold is like the regular currency. And so Rincewind, not wanting to miss out on a chance, decides to help him, but then he realizes, hey, this guy's going to get me killed. So he decides, you know what? I'm just going to buy a fast horse, take the bit of money he paid me in advance to guide him around, and escape. And he tries to, but then he gets captured, and he meets the Patrician, which is a fantastic character. He's that one character in every series that's kind of like you just want more of him. He never has a book fully dedicated to himself, but he's literally, I think he's in almost every book except for maybe the Witches books. Or in Small Gods maybe, but you just want to see more and more and more of him because he's so meticulous. He's in charge of Ankh-Morpork, and in this book, all you really see is that he explains to Rincewind the situation, which is that the leader of the empire cares about his people, and he really does love his people. He wants everybody to be happy. He looks after them. He's very idealistic. And he's worried about Two Flower. And he basically stated that if anything bad happens to Two Flower, he's going to wipe off Ankh-Morpork. And the Patrician says, and he can do it. Literally, the only reason why they're safe from the Empire is that they don't have anything that the Empire wants. The Empire is very rich, very intelligent, very militarily capable. So he tells Rincewind, you need to watch after Two Flower, and if anything happens to him, we are going to do our best to to try to ease the situation by torturing you, and hoping that by the time the armada or the army of the Empire comes, they're going to look at you and think, well, I think this you could say this makes it about even. And so, of course, Rincewind, not wanting to die, goes back, and Two Flower, he leads into trouble. Mostly these are like bar fights or whatever, and he gets excited because he wants to see the bar fights. And then the next development is the Patrician gets another contact from kind of like the advisors to the leader of the Empire, and they tell him, yeah, you need to kill him because we can't let people just go around wherever they want. We need people to stay where they want them to stay. So the Patrician hires some assassins to go after Two Flower, And then these other guys who want to rob Two Flower, the Thieves Guild. And oh my gosh, wait till you find out about the guilds. Because you don't really explore it that much in this book, but the guilds are a lot of fun too. I'm going to have to make a video just like the magic of Discworld, the guilds, the cities, just so much. And so the thieves are after Two Flower because of his gold. The assassins are after Two Flower because he has to die, because they want to make the Nigerian Empire happy. And then there's the last guild that shows up is the Merchants Guild, because they talked to Two Flower and they decided, you know what? We really like this idea of tourism. We want to bring more people in, and we see him as a. They gotta protect him because nobody's gonna want to come to the place if the tourists get killed. And so these groups are all fighting over people, and they have this wonderful. There's this wonderful line that I like, because you would think that the the merchants would be on the losing end, because we have thieves who kill and you have assassins who kill, and so it turns out that the merchants, they hire trolls, which are fairly tough. And one guy puts it, he's like, it's like the fox suddenly realized that the sheep has always been angry and can afford to hire wolves. And so there's a big brawl, and Rincewind manages to get Two Flower out, who wanted to stay and watch because he always wanted to see a fight. And so the whole place goes up in flames. And you learn that that Two Flower managed to convince this one guy to buy insurance, and he even already made his down payment. And you find out that he was getting that because it went on fire. He's getting 200 of those huge coins that you could basically buy anything with, like just anything, because of how poor Ankh-Morpork is compared to the gold in the Aegean Empire. And so Rincewind, he's thinking about it, he's like, 200 of those, you could buy the majority of Ankh-Morpork. And so I guess he's like, you know what, we gotta go. So he takes Two Flower, they leave, and that's when he meets, Bravd. You can't say that without kind of like trying to force something out of your throat. Bravd and Weasel. And, that's when he tells them the story. And Weasel and Bravd are pretty well known. But Rincewind is so terrified that he's like overdosed, and he's kind of like numb to the whole thing. So, yeah, they let him go. And in the next scene, this is where you learn about fate and the lady and the gods. That shows kind of like the Greek setup that they're playing their board game. And so there's this other one called Osler. He's a crocodile god. And as Rincewind and Two Flower are going, he puts a troll set on the board, and they get attacked by a troll, and they get separated. And Two Flower ends up going through a snake and these different animals, but he survives unharmed, perfectly fine. And Rincewind, he ends up going behind Two Flower, and he's like, why are these animals so pissed? And he's thinking about it, he's like, okay, I understand all these animals. It's even the snake that he's looking at, because he's thinking, is it poisonous? No, it has to be poisonous. It just has to be poisonous. And he's thinking about it, and he's like, but where the hell did the troll come from? The troll is just random. Even the troll was confused what it was doing there, because again, it was summoned. And so, with the troll taken care of, it's just Lady and Fate. And Fate, the next piece he puts on the board, as Rincewind and Two Flower are going about trying to figure out where they are, is it doesn't show it, but it's like a tentacle Cthulhu Lovecraftian creature. And so it shows that Two Flower sees a market, for the temple of Bel Shamath, go this way. And he's like, oh, a temple. And so he goes that way. And you know things are bad because there's some wolves that are stalking him. And they read the thing and they realize, you know what, we're not that hungry. So then you go back to Rincewind. And so it turns out that Rincewind is the lady's piece. And it makes sense. And so Rincewind, he's got, the snake that's looking at him. There's some other wolves that they're staring up at him. Death is looking at him. And so he starts to peel down and, he's falling off the tree. And then one thing leads to another. The hornet's nest falls and it lands among the wolves who lunge at it, and then it's like, okay, it's an implosion and an explosion, and then before he knows it, he's actually sucked into the tree. And he meets a dryad who's got a scratch on her arm, and at first he thinks he's saved, and he's confused because he's not supposed to be saved. He's just supposed to have random luck. And so the dryad's like, oh, I understand why you did it. Why? Because she has a wound because he hurt her tree. And so, she leads him to show him what is happening to Two Flower because of the temple he's going to. And he's like, oh, we gotta save him. And she's like, no, he's gonna. You just be thankful that all you're gonna do is die. Two Flower is gonna, have his soul sucked out. And so, he finds himself surrounded by male dryads that are huge, and he's even confused, like, I didn't know there were male dryads. And she's like, where do you think acorns come from? Never would have thought of it, but it makes perfect sense. So, yeah, he's freaking out, and she's getting ready to kill him, and he's like, you can read my mind, because apparently dryads can read minds. He's like, tell me what spell I'm about to say, because he doesn't even know it. And she freaks out, and everybody just pauses. And he's like, okay, I got to get out of here, because, these pauses don't last long. Because he's been in these situations before. And it didn't last long. She's like, grab him, and then take him as far away from the tree as possible, and then kill him. And so he runs around, and he's very nimble, because he's spent his whole life running. And he gets out, and then he finds his way into the cave. And while he's in the cave, you learn that they're not the only ones in the cave. Remember when I mentioned the chest or luggage? Well, it got the attention of Ron. It's easier to say than Vard. But by dropping pieces of gold and luring him into the temple too. And so they all meet up, and by then it's too late because the tentacle monster is coming out, and Haran's fighting everything off with his magical sword, which he's not happy with because it won't shut up. Ever. It just tells him every little thing that happens. And so, they're fighting and trying to survive and fight the tentacles. And then Rincewind, of course, ends up face to face or face to eye with this huge thing that, eclipses all eternity because, again, elder gods, Lovecraftian type creature. And so earlier he got his hands on a camera, but it's not really a camera. I can't remember what it's called, but it's got a little demon in that rapidly creates pictures. And so he raises it up and he flashes it, and the thing is, because they were in a highly magical saturated area, the salamanders inside the flash, they just were fat and filled with light, and they just exploded, and the Bel Shamath, he retreated. He's like, nope, and he left. And so, yeah, the lady won that game, and Fate was mad, so he kind of like gave her the money, and Rincewind and Two Flower decided no, they kind of want Ron to go with them, and Two Flower's like, but I don't have money. And then Rincewind's like, what do all heroes want, really? Not even gold or silver that supposedly Ron was looking for, because he did find some, because it was an altar, so he picked up some huge things and he found some. And Two Flower's like, what? And so he's like, watch. And he takes the camera, and it turns out he gets them to follow him. He gets him to follow them by taking pictures of them. And yeah, Haran actually saved them a couple times. He fought off some other trolls or whatever, which he expected 2 pictures for. And it's just been discovered already. And Haran's not the smartest. He's not intelligent. I mean, he's not stupid, but he's Beefhead, Johnny Bravo, stuff like that. Muscular, not too smart. But he's already figured out profile. Like, he's like, oh, maybe the next ones I'll get better profiles. Like, how do you... That word doesn't even exist. You couldn't... anyways. So, yeah, the next part is involves a sorceress, a dead sorcerer. And it's in a upside down mountain that they find themselves in. Because they wander into an area and Rincewind realizes there's a lot of magic here. And they're like, well, what do you mean? And he's like, toss a coin. And then he's like, okay, heads or tails? Eagle. And he tosses it and it lands on its side, so he tosses more coins and a bunch of weird stuff happens. And they talk to, it jumps to, this sorcerer is talking to her undead ghost of a father that she killed. And because she hasn't killed her other brothers or gotten rid of them, there's no throne. And yeah, so what happens with her is she can summon dragons while she's in the area, and she summons dragons, and they get Two Flower and Ron, not Rincewind, who ends up falling and ends up stuck with the sword. He wants to run, but the sword actually forces him, and it even threatens him at one point. And so yeah, because the sword doesn't want to be... He said, I've been stuck in a lake for 3 years or 300 years, and not again. So he actually forces Two Flower to go save him. And what's happening with Ron is the Lislia. She tells him, I want you to get rid of my brothers, and I'll marry you and you can become the king, because she figures he's easy to control. And he's like, sure. And Two Flower, he ends up in a dark cave, and he finds out that he can create dragons. And just because he loved dragons, he's always wanted to see a dragon. And he ends up, forming his own dragon, and he calls it Nine Flower. And so, as Rincewind makes his way to the... Well, okay, Rincewind defeated a dragon rider. Well, the sword defeated a dragon rider. And he made the dragon rider take him to their place, which was, again, underground mountain that they travel on hooks. Well, some areas they travel on hooks. And so, once he arrives, he finds a lot of crossbows aimed at him. And one of the girls, Lucilia's brother, said, we'll fight to the death. And so he makes Rincewind put on these hook boots, and they're upside down. And Rincewind's trying to talk his way out of it. He's like, wait, but I have a magic sword. It's not a fair fight. And the brother's like, so do I. And they fight, and yeah, Rincewind doesn't win that, but he still manages to survive. And so, well, he survives for a while, but then he ends up getting on, he's saved by Two Flower, who, after learning from Lucilia's dead father that the reason why he can create a dragon, which was because he's got an imagination and love for them and believes they're real, and he used the magic to create them. And you also learn that, again, dragons, in the way that Two Flower imagined them, were just swamp dragons. They were nothing like the mythical beasts that Two Flower thought of. And I like this part because he even said, real dragons, true dragons, the ones in the minds of men, only can be existed through magic. And so, yeah, Two Flower ends up catching Rincewind after he's defeated and falling to the death, and then he ends up catching Ron after he saved after he defeated two of the brothers and told them to get out. And as they're trying to escape from Lucilia, they go higher and higher and higher. Two Flower passes out, and Lucilia saves Ron, but Two Flower and Rincewind are falling, and of course at that point Rincewind meets death. And he's trying to summon a dragon because he figures, okay, if Two Flower can, he can. But that's like, you can't do it because you don't believe in them. Well, what Rincewind ends up doing is he tears a fabric in reality. Or he kind of like flicks the fabric of reality and it jiggles a little. And he ends up teleported into an airplane where he's the doctor in kind of like a modern world. And he's looking at his friend. Excuse me. Oh, you are lucky you can't smell that. Oh, what did I had Cheerios for breakfast. How is that? Oh, then again I had Arby's. So he's, freaking out because the guy he was talking with passed out. And, there's a there's a stewardess like, what's wrong? Aren't you a doctor? He's like, yeah, I'm a nuclear physicist. And then it teleports again, and the next thing you know is they're flying in the air. They're still falling, not quite as high, but instead of the ground coming up towards to meet them like custard pie, it's water, and they splash. And well, one thing leads to another, and the next part, the next section starts off with golden-eyed, silver-hand Dickolos, and somebody called the arch astronomer of Krull looking at Dickolus's latest creation, which looks like an egg, and it's basically a spaceship. And they start talking about GoldenEye's, his history, and he designed one thing for somebody, and they like, you know what, I never want you to create something again, so I'm taking your eyes. And then he designed something else for somebody after learning to hear and taste the metal and stuff like that. And the other guy's like, I'm taking your hand, so he has a silver hand. And so the third guy, they're talking. He's like, well, the arch astronomer's like, what did I say? What did I promise you? And Nicholas is like, nothing. I don't want anything. Don't take any part of my body. Just let me go. That's all you promised me. He's like, yeah, I lied. And he shoots him. And Nicholas' last words, looking at the arrow, was shoddy craftsmanship, and he dies. And then you go to Rincewind and Two Flower. And it turns out this is like 6 months later. They've been floating for a while, and they realize the current's going faster. Well, they realize that Two Flower fell asleep, but the current's going faster, and Rincewind realizes they're going towards the edge of the world. And so, unsure what else to do, he sees a frog and he saves the frog, and so yeah, they end up hitting something, and are rescued by a water troll named Tithys. I'm really glad that the main characters have the easiest names to pronounce. I am so happy. Oh my goodness. Anyways, the guy saves him. He takes him to his little shack. He explains that there's like a network that catches debris and everything for the Skrull Empire, so this way they can build things. And he's a slave, and they're gonna be made slaves. And they try to get out. Rincewind tries to slash him with a sword, even though Two Flower said that's not gonna work on him, because he wouldn't leave these weapons lying around if it didn't work. And it didn't work. Well, actually, it doesn't work because Tithys he's weak to the moon because it pulls his water away. And so, yeah, somebody comes for them, but instead of slavers who only come once a month, they get these this hovering boat that they get on, and it's powered by hydrophobes, which are magicians that were taught to hate water, and they were raised on dry water, which was magically, apparently that's something, dry water in that world, and they find water disgusting. They end up dying young because they're made out of water ish, kind of. I don't know how that works, but yeah, so they take them there, and they're informed that they aren't going to be slaves. In fact, they have a nice spread for them. They have all sorts of seafood that Rincewind will not eat because he thought he liked seafood, but then there's candy urchins, diced starfish, the biscuits that he tried. He's like, these are made out of something sea water, ocean related. He's like, yeah, seaweed. And so he's like, no, I'm not gonna eat anything. But yeah, so it turns out that they're not, they have a nice spread, and they treat him real nice. And they're like, well, what's going on? Oh, turns out they're gonna be sacrificed to a god, and the god named them two. Specifically, he wanted those two. And you find out that it was Fate. And you find out that it was Fate because Fate is a sore loser. And he refuses to give up. And you find this out from the frog that, Rincewind saved and ended up biting him. And it was Lady Luck. And she said, I'm going to give you one chance and one chance only. And you got to get out. And so the chance came via the guy who greeted them. He comes in and, he's got men to take him. And what happened was, earlier, when Rincewind found out he was going to be a slave, being the quick thinker that he is, he grabbed a bottle that was created of a wine that was made out of sea grapes, which he liked at first, but then he found out sea grapes were a type of jellyfish, and he just tossed it at the guy, and the guy activated like a time spell that slowed the bottle down. So what happened was, once he stepped in, the time spell broke. It smashed him. It hit him, and Rincewind and Two Flower just shot out of there. And so, they're running around, and while they're running around, the luggage gets onto the scroll area, and he starts just wreaking havoc. And so Rincewind and Two Flower end up finding themselves in where the astronaut, they call them something with a C, where the spacefarers are going to go. And he gets in. They end up having to attack the spacefarers because that's what the situation demanded. And they end up getting the suits. And one thing leads to another, and they end up finding themselves inside rushing towards the space egg. While they're not attacked because the luggage ends up drawing everybody's attention, and they blast him. And it turns out that, like I said, sapient pearlwood is not. Magic is nothing to it. It just made him a little stronger for a bit. And so that egg ends up shooting out, and it says the end, but it's not the end, because Rincewind ends up in this weird little. He didn't get in, he didn't get in, but instead he's looking around. He's falling, and he sees the kind of like the rim of the world, and he sees that there's special fish that evolved to be able to live and snatch food out of the edge of the world. And then he's falling and heading towards the egg, and that's where it ends. So that's the plot of, the Discworld, and that's the main story, and those are the main characters. But I haven't actually got into the main character, the most important character of the Discworld series, and that is the Discworld. And the Discworld is called the Discworld because it's a disc. It's a flat disc, and the disc rests on top of 4 elephants that are holding it up, and it's I can't remember if it's the days or the seasons, but those are caused because the elephants are taking turns shifting the weights to hold it, and they're balanced on a giant turtle's back called the Great Atuden. And he's just he's a giant space turtle that's going through space, and they don't really know what he's going to or from. There was one theory that they had that the reason why he's going is he's going to meet up with other turtles, and they're going to engage in coitus, and that's going to birth new stars and new turtles that are going to go out throughout the galaxy, and that's called the Big Bang Theory. And so, the reason why the Skrull or the Krull were trying to go out into space was because they wanted to see what the Great Atuden was, I guess, because you kind of need to know, is he going to be on top or on bottom? Because again, if he's on top, okay, that's fine. But if he's on the bottom, then what's going to happen when a great turtle is going to get behind him on the top? I don't know how turtles have sex. I'm just assuming. And, it crushes the elephants and the Discworld. So they had to know. And it's funny, though, because they got a short window of time, and the only way they can do it, and the window of time is based on the swaying of its tail. But the reason why I say that the setting is the most important isn't just because the turtle itself is an interesting setting, but it's because when you read these books, this world is evolving, and it really feels like these people are shaped by this world. There's witches, there's wizards, there's ogres, there's goblins, there's the Watch, there's Morpork, there's the Aegeans, there's I can't remember what the name of the continent is in Jinzo, but yeah, there's all these fantastic places and characters, and they're all based on the setting, and the setting is the most important thing in this series, because these books, they don't all follow Rincewind. They follow different characters, and in fact, the main characters, for the most part, all have their own series of books. And it's only possible because of this great world Terry Pratchett's created. So I would argue that the series is the main character, or the star is the Discworld. And so that's my review of the Discworld first novel, The Color of Magic. And before I leave, I got a question for you guys, because there's a lot of series that I'm a big fan of. what I could do is this could go two ways. I could either one go through all 42 books, just shoot through them, and then do a review each week, or maybe often enough of each book. Or I could do what I'm currently doing and just do different stories from different authors. If you guys could share what you would like or not like, that'd be fantastic. So. This is Jimmy 22 logging off.